Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. If you're not speaking right now, if you could turn off your mics, that would be great. My name is Joy Worland and I am the consultant for continuing education in small and rural libraries at the Department of Libraries. And I'm very excited about this panel this morning. We have guests from the Vermont Historical Society, the Vermont State Archives, and librarians who are actually doing this work that we're going to be talking about today. So just to kind of tell you what we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about sort of the scope of collections, the variety of what's out there, and you'll hear from the panelists that they each have very interesting collections, which are very different. And, I think a lot of times these collections and libraries are probably unique to the specific library. There's going to be a lot of difference in what people have. So one of the things is just to talk about, like, what is a special collection? What is an archival collection? What's the difference? We've got people here who know a lot about that, can help with that. Just to learn about what resources are available from our guests, Eileen and Rachel from VHS and Vasara, and learn from each other. So a long-term goal actually of this gathering is that maybe there would be, we could create a community of practice for people, librarians who are working in libraries with these sorts of collections, so that you have a support network and people to learn from and share ideas with. So that would be super helpful, I think. One of the great phrases that came up in our planning meeting was to how do we make these collections assets, not burdens? So, like, you have these cool things in your library, but maybe you're not quite sure what to do with them. Other people have been through this too. You don't have to do this all on your own. There are resources, and so you'll learn some things, some tips about that today. A lot of great benefits of engaging with these kind of collections, the programming opportunities around that, the partnerships with historical societies and other local groups, bringing different people into the library. I think our panelists will have some things to share about that, some successful programming that brought people that had not necessarily been regular library users before, and just the curiosity, engaging with the history of your community and lifelong learning, and that aspect is just such a great fit. Um, at the same time, some considerations to think about that I just want to lead off with, just so that people don't feel like they necessarily have to engage with this. I think it's really important to think about your library's mission. Does this fit into your library's mission? Do you have the capacity to do it? A lot of our libraries have very small staffs. If you're going to be engaging with the special part of your collection, is there something else that you're not doing? And if so, how do you decide what to prioritize? And also, just, it's a very different skill set. So do you have that skill set, or can you find people that do have that skill set? Because if you're going to do this, you want to do it well. So just out of respect for the collection, to make sure that you have the expertise, or you're leaning on people that do, like the people in our panel today, or finding volunteers. I think Catherine will talk about how she's had great success with some very learned volunteers that happen to be in our community. Um, Also thinking about how you're going to catalog it. Do you know how to do that? Or what are the options for that? And you'll hear some about that today, probably. Um, and then also just thinking about the space in your library, because not only do a lot of our libraries have small staff, some of them are in very small buildings. So just, be thoughtful, and again, like, be thoughtful and intentional about engaging with the collection, and what is the best way to do that. And then if you decide yes, which would be very cool, just think about policies, and we're going to talk some about that today. And this is possibly something that could come out of the community of practice with some development of policies. Rachel and Eileen have some examples and templates and best practices around that, because it's just very important that you engage with this in an intentional way, and um, have rules around, like, what kind of things are you going to accept for donations? How are you going to handle the materials that are already there? So um, just wanted to put a few little caveats out there, like, before we get started. In the other part of the more positive part of the um, presentation, and I guess, I mean, I don't mean to not be positive about it. I just want to make sure that people are thoughtful about it, and that there's so many things going on at libraries, and just making sure that this fits in the full scope and the mission of your library. And, different libraries obviously have slightly different missions. So it might work great at one library, and they might have the capacity to do it, the space, and yours might not. So just thinking about that as you go into it, and also just remembering that for all these topics, you got people here that know a ton about it, and you could ask a lot of questions, and they seem to be very generous, Rachel and Eileen, with their time and answering questions. So I'm going to turn it over to them now just to talk about what they do and what they can do for your libraries.
Great. Thanks, Joy. I think I am going to go first, followed by Rachel. So just to introduce myself, my name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm the Director of Service and Outreach for the Vermont Historical Society. And so part of what that means is I work with historical societies and museums around the state. So there's over 190 of them. So similar to our public libraries, we have a lot. Which is wonderful, but they are also very small and all volunteer. So we do a lot to try to support them and support their work with collections and with sort of what they do with them. And so this is a natural offshoot of that kind of work. So what I wanted to talk about this morning was just a little bit about what resources we do have that might be helpful for those of you who have special collections, we're calling them. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by special collections, and then turn it over to Rachel to talk a little bit more about what she does. So VHS has what we call the League of Local Historical Societies and Museums. And I'm going to put a link to some websites and a resource sheet that we've put together today as well for you all in the chat once I'm done chatting myself. But a couple of things I want to highlight for resources we have. We have our local history e-newsletter and listserv, which is a bi-weekly e-newsletter that we have information on what programs we're doing related to local historical societies and museums, resources, and then actually as a place to list local history events. So if you have, as a library, are hosting history-related events, we are happy to have that in the e-news, as well as the listserv, which offers an opportunity to people to talk to each other or ask questions, share information, share resources, that sort of thing. We provide technical assistance and have a mentors program, and this is where I'm guessing this might be helpful for a lot of you folks. So I'm always happy by email or by phone to offer advice, to find resources on topics, can do site visits, and then we have what's called our mentors program, which really matches an organization in need with a mentor to provide one-on-one direct assistance related to a specific topic. And then we also have professional development and training opportunities. So similar to today's webinar here, but a little bit more focused for historical societies and museums. So they include things like virtual roundtables, which we have our first one on Thursday at noon on communicating about history, if folks are interested. We do an annual conference and also have periodic workshops. And again, that information is available through our e-newsletter or on our website. And we also actually have a lending library. So if you need specific information and books and publications related to especially collections care or management or museum related topics, we have that for folks to borrow. And then we have our resources pages on our website, which offer curated links to a variety of materials. So again, I'll put that information, the website page in the chat, as well as our resource sheet, so you can have that all in front of you and you don't have to remember. But I think, again, most importantly, I know for myself and for Rachel, we are here and looking forward to the talk today with all these wonderful library folks about how we can help you work with these collections. And so what I wanted to sort of start off talking about a little bit is what is or are special collections. And there's lots of different definitions that you might use, and there's certainly specific definitions related to special collections that come out of the library and archival community. But I think we want to sort of put it as a real sort of big pot of things that we could potentially include in special collections when we're talking about them today. So that can include things like art, so paintings, sculpture, framed works, drawings, that sort of thing. Natural history collections like taxidermy or other specimens. And I love that Catharine has one of her taxidermy pieces behind her when she puts her video back on. History or material, there we love them. Awesome. History or material culture collections. So you might have local history collections of your own. You might have historic furniture or historic material culture collections in your library. This includes archival materials, and Rachel will talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about that, but documents, photos, non-published works. And it could also potentially include things like architecture, so interior finishes, special architectural features, or building materials actually might be something that you could consider a special collection, depending on the type of building or buildings that you are located in. And so what I like to say especially for libraries, is that sort of special collections are hiding everywhere. So you might be in one of the libraries that has a very extensive collection that has come in to the library over the years, or you might have just sort of bits and pieces of special or historic items that are in your library that you might be wondering, how do I care for them? What do I do with them? And what does it mean? And so I think when you're looking at special collections in your own institution, it's up to you to sort of decide what is or isn't a special collection. And the reason I think it's important to sort of make some definitions, and we can talk more about this, I think, in the panel, is that special collections often means that they need different consideration and care than your everyday books or things that are replaceable. And so when thinking about what is a special collection at your library, I want to sort of put these three questions to sort of have you think about. Is why was something given to the library? How did it show up in the library? And so there's a lot of history behind how these kind of collections came to libraries, but a lot of it has to do with community ideas of material culture as an important part both of philanthropy, in the same way as giving money. So it's important to give important collections or valuable collections to your nonprofits, and libraries are often seen as those community stewards, the community institution, the place to be, or the place where these things can exist, especially when communities don't have a museum or a historical society. So libraries have sometimes become the town's attic, or become the place where if somebody wants to give something to the community, they give it to the library. And so that sort of intention can be why you might consider something special. How unique is it is a big consideration, I think. So again, published books are sort of what we might call common or replaceable materials in most senses. So artwork, most historical items, unpublished works are much less sort of easily replaceable. And so that's why you might consider something special if it's not replaceable. And then I think lastly, what does an object or an item or a collection mean to your community? Are there items that are an important part of your community history or memory that you have in the library? And those can be things that were meant to be sort of historic or part of the community that were given in that way or collected in that way. But it can also be items that have existed in your library, maybe for the last 50, 75, 100 years, that have now become an important part of community memory that you might consider special collections. And also, do they have historic and or artistic value? Is another reason we might consider something to be a special collection. So that's just a little bit of what I had about special collections, and to get to the minds going and the thought processes. And I think I'll turn it over to Rachel then.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eileen. My name is Rachel Onuf, and I'm the director of the Vermont Historical Records Program, which is based at the State Archives and Records Administration in Middlesex. And our program is now about 5 years old, which is hard for me to believe. And the point of it, our mission, is to provide technical assistance to historical records repositories and to try to help build statewide capacity to support those institutions. So that involves a lot of collaboration, and two of my favorite collaborators are Eileen and Joy, and we've been working together as long as I've been involved in the VHRP. And Eileen focuses, we all can do it all, but Eileen focuses most on art and artifacts and objects, material culture, and I'm more on the historical records, so archives, paper-based materials, and we often will do site visits together if there's collections that have some of each, and we can also refer people to other people who do similar work. like our friends at the Preservation Trust of Vermont and Historic Preservation, if the building is really your biggest historical artifact. And for many public libraries, it is. So we can also refer you to others who can help with your specific questions. So we try to be a go-to and set you up with resources if we can't help you directly. So in my tenure on the VHRP, myself and now I have a colleague, and Sally Blanchard O'Brien is the roving archivist. So we both go out in the field. We've been to over 25 libraries, and some of the specific work we've done, we're typically brought in to help assess special collections, particularly if they have historical records in them. And that can be as simple as a published local history collection, and librarians who are kind of, I want this space for an expanded young adult section. No one is using these materials. Can I, kind of looking for permission to dispose of some materials. And I think that's an important thing to consider. And I worked with Paul Carnahan, the recently retired librarian at Vermont Historical Society, to develop a short bibliography of books that every public library, if they can, in Vermont, ought to have, kind of the best resources for Vermont history. If you don't have a really broad collection, nor do you want it, nor does your community seem to want it. But that every library ought to try to have these titles. And we did a meetup at the More Free Library in Newfane with a bunch of other local librarians and kind of talked it over using their collection there as a test case. I've also worked a lot, again, with Joy and Eileen on grant writing workshops that then led to working directly with libraries. And in some cases, we were successful. So the Jaquith Library in Marshfield got an IMLS grant, and the More Free Library in Newfane, we worked closely together on the same grant, which was for accelerating promising practices in small and rural libraries. And they did a community memory project when they were ultimately successful their second year of applying to IMLS. Also have worked with Jeanne at the Brooks Memorial Library on some smaller grants, happy to help conceptualize grants, review drafts, help with navigating the federal system if that's the way you're going. So I try to really, again, help promote your ability to bring in additional resources to help fulfill your vision of what you want your library to be able to do. Sometimes when we do these assessments, which is the thing we do most typically at public libraries, we are able to help identify what specific records are. So at the Carpenter Karst Library, before Beth joined there, I went over just to identify what these different bound manuscript volumes were, to make sure that the rarest, oldest materials were in a locked case as opposed to on the open shelves. Help with that kind of work. I love looking at old records and trying to figure out what the heck they are. So that's something we can always provide. Also worked down in Bristol at the Lawrence Memorial Library. There was a small amount of institutional records of the library itself, which had been around for over close to 100 years. So Coco Mosley and I sat down, took an hour and a half to organize them and box them. And I was able to bring some boxes and donate those to the library to hold those records. So again, I kind of describe my work as being proactively reactive. Like if you have a question or a problem or a puzzle, I will respond to that and try to engage with it and make us find a solution if there isn't something readily available. Most recently, I've been working with the Proctor Free Library to put some of their finding aids for some of their extensive Proctor family member manuscript collections online. They only had a typescript copy of each of these finding aids. And a finding aid is kind of an inventory or a guide to a collection. If there's many, many boxes of files, it helps the researcher navigate that material. So we've put those online, and they're now accessible to the world. as it's interesting how things also seem to come in waves. So now I'm working with a couple other organizations that are interested in getting finding aids up online, and they don't have the means to do that easily themselves. The other thing that's happened most recently is working with colleagues at Department of Libraries and at my shop, Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, on developing record schedules for the records that libraries create. So that group is meeting monthly, and that work is ongoing, and they're developing record schedules to guide municipal libraries on what records to keep and for how long. So that's some of the work that I do. We also do broader and coordinated work that has definitely an impact for public libraries. And again, working with my favorite colleagues, Department of Libraries and Vermont Historical Society, I'm part of a planning grant right now on developing a statewide digital repository with the intent of building a platform that would be easy for any Vermont repository that wanted to contribute digital assets to share those broadly through this union catalog, this union discovery portal. So that's the kind of stuff that I get to do, which I just love doing, including things like bringing together this group, which I do hope I'll be, full disclosure, I really hope that we do continue to talk and support each other and develop whatever it is you need to feel like you can be successful in managing that aspect of your library. So a little bit now about these special collections, and just to reiterate what Joy said at the outset about the importance of your mission, and wanting to think about how the special collections in your care, once you've identified what they are and where they are, how do they advance your mission? How are they helping you do what it is that you have stated explicitly you are there to do? There's also an important awareness that you have to have that these collections are being held in the public trust. They're being entrusted with these materials. And as Eileen said, in many cases, they have been given unto your library, probably not to you, but to some of your predecessors by members of your community who entrusted the library with care of these materials. That does not mean, as Joy said, that you necessarily are on the hook to continue that obligation. Absolutely important to take a long, hard look at what they are, how they came to the library, and how they are serving your community and serving your mission. I agree that you may determine that that's not something that is appropriate anymore, or that you need to be continuing to do. But I would pause before making any radical moves to deaccession or otherwise get rid of your collections that you might identify as special. There's different strategies for figuring out how best to manage them and maintain them. And it may be that they are not something that you as a librarian have particular facility in caring for or knowing about, but that does not necessarily mean that they should leave the library. You should take the longer view of, are these important for your community? And is there something you can do to maintain them and be a good steward, even if you're not going to maybe be thoroughly engaged with them in the way that you think they ought to be. So but again, lots of different opinions on this. And I hope we can over time talk about that more. The only other thing I want to note is to talk a little bit about policy. And you guys, you know policy, you know how to do it, you make it, you work it, you implement it. I love it. There's a collections management policy that is probably the most appropriate thing to think about for your special collections in your holdings. So it's probably a distinct policy from those that govern your general collections, both circulating and reference. But it doesn't have to be a really huge document. Catharine shared what Bixby Library has, and it's just several pages, and it's fairly complete. It covers what's the scope of the collection, how are you going to care for it, how will it be used and made accessible to the public, Who has authority to make decisions about this collection? That's important. For most, it'll be a board, your library board. How do you accession things? How do you bring them into this collection? How do you deaccession things? How do you let things go? How do you loan things, both out and maybe potentially even incoming loans, if you have the space for exhibit and display of materials? And what kind of documentation do you have or should you have for your holdings? And those are kind of the main sections of a collections management policy. You do not have to write this from scratch. There are many templates out there. And then once you have the policy in place, you can think about different procedures and different forms that you might want to develop. Again, using examples that are already out there. If you are actively bringing in new materials to your special collections, you'd probably want a deed of gift form. If you have a space for researchers to come use materials, you might want to have some guidelines about how that happens. You know, what can they have with them? Are they being monitored by a staff member? What space do they use? Can they help themselves to the material? Do photocopies cost money? Can they put things up on their website? You know, all of these different considerations, but they've all been considered before by other people and decisions have been made. So you don't have to kind of go through that process entirely on your own. We also have Joy and Eileen and myself here to help, and all of these other wonderful librarians who are working with these materials, who can help with that process. So I'm going to stop now because I think what is really important about today's session, and I'm so excited about this, is to hear from some of these librarians and how they're managing their collections. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you, and thank you, Eileen. So before we go into the next section, there's one question in the chat. How many repositories does Vermont have for 2D or 3D items materials?
Yeah, so I was just looking up, I'll put it in the chat, a survey that we did. It was a 2008 survey called Connecting to Collections, but I would guess it holds true relatively for today. Is there are over 300 historical societies, historic sites, galleries, and museums, 248 town clerks, 186 public libraries, 24 academic libraries, and 18 probate courts that hold what might be considered collections or special collections. So a lot, I guess, is the answer there.
And I'll just add on to that this question came up not too long ago, I think, and we realized, and I think Josh Muse at Libraries reached out to us, and we were all like, we don't actually know how many public libraries have these materials. So that's part of the work of this group, I think, will be finding those that do, and making sure that all the, I mean, maybe we do know about all the ones that have taxidermy, but there are a few, you know, like, are you talking? Do you know each other? And making sure that people are aware of who else has similar types of special collections.
I think, you know, just listening to you talk, there might be libraries that have them and don't realize they have them too. I mean, you know, it's like the architecture point that you made, Eileen, was it's just fascinating because there's so many amazing buildings, and like librarians might not necessarily be thinking in terms of like, oh, maybe that special architectural feature in our library that's been there over 100 years actually can be considered a collection. I just have two quick questions before we go into the other part. One is the bibliography of sort of the should have. Is that where can we find that?
Well, Joy, we'll find it on wherever we put the landing page for this group.
Okay. So, and then also you mentioned that monthly meeting of the people working on the records retention, just in case people here are interested, can you say when that is?
Yeah, it's usually on Thursdays at 9 a.m. I believe that's I'll check. I think it's this week. No. It's either the 3rd or the 4th. Wait, I take it back. So the next one's going to be on February 9th. I will put my email in the chat, and if you're interested in learning more about that meeting, record keeping for municipal libraries, I will connect you with my colleague who's running that.
Okay, so let's move on. We're going to hear from 3 librarians, and we're going to start with Kristin Urie from the J.W. Simpson Library in East Craftsbury.
Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here, and I feel like I've already learned some new stuff. So I am Kristin. I'm the director here at the John Woodruff Simpson Memorial Library. This library was founded in 1921 by Jeanne Simpson and her cousin Mary Jeanne. And before it was a library, it was a general store and post office, like a community gathering place in the 1800s. And when Jeanne and Mary Jeanne opened the library, they kept the display cases from the general store, and those became like a cabinet of curiosities with objects from all over the world, objects from that had come from the Simpson family, some from right around here in East Craftsbury, some from people who grew up here and traveled and sent things back. So that's kind of the first aspect that's always been part of this library's special collections. The second part is a costume collection. In 1923, Jeanne founded the East Hill Players, and then for the following 50 years directed Summer Theater, which also included, was primarily Shakespeare and some other plays, but we have an attic full of costumes, props, set pieces, and up until about 10 years ago, there was a part of the costume collection that was circulating. So community groups, schools would borrow costumes for different performances and events. And that's something that we're possibly going to revive. It's in progress. So there are 2 aspects of our special collections that are newer, and those are the ones I'm going to focus on. The first is archives, and the second is films. So when I started working here in the spring of 21, the library had been closed for a year, and during that time, the board had done some strategic planning and really wanted to do more outreach and programming in the community. So I'm just adding that in as after listening to the talk about the mission. But anyway, one of the first things I did was peek in the drawers. I don't know, I think you can see these drawers, these like deep wooden drawers that were part of the general store. So when I opened these drawers, some of them had library things like tape and, I don't know, tools, screwdrivers, things that we would use around the library. And some of them were packed to the brim with documents, photographs, objects. And this was definitely outside of the realm of my experience as a librarian. So I reached out to the community, and that's something I think you're going to hear echoed throughout all of our talks is don't underestimate the talent in your community and the expertise in your community. I would not have been able to do anything that we've done here without help from volunteers. So in our case, Natalie Kinsey, some of you might know her. She's a prolific author, passionate historian, and she grew up going to this library, and her mom grew up going to this library. And so Natalie and her husband, Tom, stepped forward, and they headed up our new archiving team. We were going to tackle these drawers. I think at the same time, I connected with Sally who is, as Rachel mentioned, part of the Historic Records Program, a roving archivist. What a cool job. And Sally gave me some guidance about materials. So we got some archival boxes and folders from university products. And we got started. And Natalie, Tom, and library trustee Valerie, they came once a week for a few hours. Tom has a document camera and set up a little photography station. Natalie would pull something out of the drawer, Tom would photograph it, and then Natalie would take some notes, get it into a folder, label it, put it in the box. So this was our preliminary effort at really just getting things into better storage and finding out what was in there. And inevitably, every week, I might be working in another part of the library and I'd hear this, and Natalie, you know, oh my gosh, you have to come and see this. So it was really exciting time of discovery. There was really, each week we found something that was surprising and wonderful. And that carried on that summer into the fall. And then around October, we received a huge donation from a community member who had been storing things from the Simpson family. I think there were 13 totes altogether. Hundreds of photographs, photo albums, diaries, letters, you know, from the 1800s, early 1900s, and films. There were over 50 reels of 16 millimeter films. Some were labeled, some were not. They seemed to be from the 20s, 30s, 40s mostly. And now, with the drawers, I felt like I was out of my wheelhouse. This really was outside of my experience completely. So at this point, I connected with Rachel. I think Sally had said, Rachel's the person to help with these films. And it was amazing. It was really, Rachel, you know, gave me some really practical advice about the films themselves, and said, well, you know, the first thing is to figure out what's on the reels. We knew that they had been taken by this woman, Bunny Grant, who was a photographer and lived here in East Craftsbury with Miss Jeanne. But we didn't know much beyond that. They seemed to be mostly about East Craftsbury or the Simpson family travels. So Rachel said, okay, great. How about, you know, we have these manual film viewers, and you can, you know, look at the films without compromising or jeopardizing the film itself. There's this great guy, Fred Pond, at the Historical Society, and Mary Albee also has all this, you know, very knowledgeable about films. So she basically organized a work party. They came to the library with 2 manual film viewers. We had a couple, Natalie and Tom were there, and I think some other trustees stopped by, but basically we spent a whole afternoon reviewing these films, and we managed to look at, I think, a little, maybe half of them, enough to determine that they were in good shape, they were interesting content, and they were well taken, like they were well made. The person who was taking the films knew what they were doing. So we decided that, you know, the consensus by the end of the day was, yes, these are all worth digitizing, which is the way to preserve them. So then once we had decided, we were, you know, I went to the board, they agreed, and then figuring out how to pay for the digitizing. It was going to cost about $8,000. So I reached out to a local fund, the Craftsbury Community Fund, through the Vermont Community Foundation. They gave us $1,500. And then we had 2 grants in hand at the time. The Northeast Kingdom Fund, Vermont Community Foundation grant we had for archiving and connecting people with history. And then the Cultural Recovery Grant through Vermont Humanities and the Vermont Arts Council, that was a $5,000 grant we had for the same purpose, like archiving, displaying, connecting people, creating access to the history here. So I reached out to them and said, hey, we had this unexpected donation of films. We'd like to move forward with that. Can we redirect some of the funding since it falls within the scope of what we're trying to do with these grants, and they were very supportive. So that made up about $6,000, and then I went to the trustees and said, hey, could we put $2,000 from our budget in to make this happen? So we went ahead and did that. We sent the films to George Blood after getting some recommendations from Rachel and Fred and Mary. We decided to go with George Blood in Pennsylvania. We also had some audio reels that we sent to them, which we didn't know what was on them, but we decided to go for it based on the labeling on the boxes. And we had the films digitized, and it was, yeah, very super exciting. They now all live on like a little plastic box, 2 little plastic boxes. We have the originals were returned to us, but what this enabled us to do was to begin to create access for the community to these films. And we had our first movie night, historic movie night in East Craftsbury in October. There were 100 people came, and we didn't do this at the library. We did it at the church down the road, which is the best kind of gathering space in our East Craftsbury campus of organizations. And it was really thrilling. There were people, there were 2-year-olds there, there were 95-year-olds there, there were old timers. And what I had done, we got some editing software, and I had gathered clips from a bunch of the different reels that had to do with farming. So harvesting oats, haying, all using horses. And yeah, and some natural disasters in there. There was some footage after the 1927 flood and the 38 hurricane. But people, it was really great. People connecting, people recognizing people in the films, people recognizing places in the films. And for something like that, the farming in particular, that's something that's still happening here. We're still haying and we're still cutting corn. And so there was an element that was kind of connecting from the past to the present, but also really deepening a sense of place for a lot of people. So I think I've gone over my time, but yeah, we've had 2 movie nights since then. We just had one actually on Sunday, and with different themes for each one. We did one that was about winter sports and activities and cutting ice on Caspian Lake. This most recent one was Shakespeare and theater and fencing. And we're going to keep doing these movie nights until indefinitely, I think, because they're really fun. Okay.
Thank you so much. I was actually just starting to type in the chat. I love this story so much. You get the whole movie thing. It's just so inspiring. And I love that you made that point of how it connected to the current contemporary life in your community and area as well. I think it just doesn't get much better than that. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Catherine, let's hear what's going on at Bixby.
I want to hear more of what Kristin has to say. What a great story. That's so much fun. Thank you. So I'm Catherine Hayes. I'm the director at the Bixby Memorial Free Library in Vergennes, which is, I just reminded myself this morning, is the oldest city in the state. And we also serve the 5 surrounding communities. So Addison, Ferrisburg, Panton on the lake, plus Waltham and Vergennes. So 5 communities, about 7,500 people. The library is 110 years young this year, very exciting. So the doors opened in 1912, actually last year. So I think everything that Eileen talked about is what the library is. We, I think, have almost all of it. We have a very large, impressive building. I actually have some of the original drawings from the grandson of the architect, great-grandson, who provided the original drawings to us. We have a room that we have devoted to our archives, which are very extensive for families, businesses,
and all sorts of original materials. And I think I started right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I was hired in May of 2020 and wasn't able to come to the state until July. But because we were closed, it was kind of a silver lining for us in terms of being able to take a look at what was going on in the building. And really what initiated a lot of our conversations around the collection, the special collections, were space and how could we make best use of space. We are incredibly fortunate to have a very, I think, relatively large library for this state. And we are a cultural center for the community. So making sure that we were making good use of that space was really, really important to us. And on the second floor, there is a room that was called the museum room that had been locked for 10 years. And it was the same footprint. I think it's about 1,700 square feet as the community room on the first floor that had been renovated. And in there was our objects and artifacts collections, including things like this bird. And there's a sculpture over here, a duck and a chick out of marble. We have a huge collection of arrowheads that have been collected. We have cannonballs from all of the wars that happened up and down Lake Champlain that people found in their fields and brought to us. And there had been a lot of work that had been done over the past couple of years before I got here through a grant from the CVNHP, the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership, to do an inventory of all of the objects and artifacts. So everything was labeled, everything was numbered, and a lot of effort had gone into that. And yet they sat there behind closed doors. So the biggest effort that we undertook was to go about trying to figure out what to do with those. There had been some policies in place, and there had been kind of an attitude, I think, that's been told to me of how do we get rid of this stuff, or why do we have all this stuff, and why do we need it? We're a library. So it was something that really gave us the opportunity to take a step back and really think about what we wanted to do about it. And I think that's why I want to talk a little bit about the motivation behind our collection and what I've come to understand about why it's so important, and it's been alluded to by Kristin and the other presenters, is it's really, for starters, was about space maximization, but it really quickly became clear that we had treasures that meant a lot to the community, and that the community felt like they had been cut off from a lot of this. I learned that people who didn't come into the library much for books loved to come to the library to see the museum collection. And they remembered it as kids. They remembered it from workers we'd have, plumbers who would come, would talk about going and seeing all these objects and artifacts, and their eyes would light up. And I realized that it was an opportunity for us to connect with a part of our community who might not come to the library for other sorts of things, but did remember this. So understanding that, we had the opportunity to really engage them in ways that they had loved in their growing up and wanted to also share with their kids and the next generation. It was also helpful for me right from the get-go to understand how much resources we have in working with Eileen and Rachel and Joy. And I would highly recommend to everybody to watch the recording of the presentation called "So Your Library is a Museum." If you haven't seen it, it gave me so much support and understanding that it doesn't have to be either or. And in fact, there's a bicentennial gazetteer that lists us as the Bixby Library and Museum. So it kind of has gone in and out of fashion over the years for the library to either embrace it or lock it away. And so this was an opportunity to really rethink that and to celebrate how it could help us to achieve our mission, not as something to get rid of, but as something to embrace and make available for more people, to inspire people, and to get people excited about it, as you can see with Kristin, how exciting it is to find these things. It was also a opportunity to really reflect and honor the donors. And I think Eileen talked about the philanthropy that was part of it. So things that had been donated to the library were really because the library is about knowledge. And so even though there were collections that didn't necessarily reflect the local history, people had gone off from Vergennes and surrounding towns to Europe to go to school, to the Midwest, and they would bring these collections back so that people back home could understand them and see what the rest of the world was and enhance their book learning with these objects and artifacts. But we absolutely didn't do it alone. And we're incredibly fortunate here that once I started digging into this and started asking questions of the community, several people really came forward to make the time and the talent for all of this to happen, which we absolutely couldn't do without. So we're fortunate that we have a very strong local Vergennes Historical Society, but they don't have any physical space. We have a very active Ferrisburg Historical Society that does have a small building. And then there's an Addison Historical Society who also does not have a building. So one of the first things I did was just connect with them and use our space and display cases to be able to have them show the things that were in people's garages. And that really started the conversation and sort of rebuilding trust in collaboration with them. We also, Eileen happens to live in Waltham, one of our towns, so we have very local talent and encouragement for what we started to go about. But in addition to that, we have people who have experience as educators at the Shelburne Museum, Rokeby Museum, the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, and so also the Vermont Historical Society, volunteer for many, many years. So we kind of feel like we have an A-list team that I didn't even know were out there, but once we started opening our doors and talking more about the collection, they came to us. They now meet on a weekly basis in our history room, is what we call it, where the archives exists. And they've been spending the past year putting together the finding aids that Eileen mentioned in terms of being able to take the collections that we have of journals and business records, et cetera, and literally write down what is in them so we can then take that information and make it more accessible. That's really what the work effort is for us at this point, is first of all, getting all of the objects and artifacts, repurposing a room in our basement, making it secure from a heat and humidity perspective, investing with some other grants to have the proper boxes and shelving, be able to move everything out of there, move it to the basement, take all of the exhibit cases and move those throughout the rest of the libraries, and some of which we donated to an emerging museum in the Northeast Kingdom. So some of them went off to new homes, and then freeing up that space so that we could use that for programming, using the storage room in the basement so that we could have rotating exhibits throughout based on themes along the lines of what Kristin was talking about. Creating the finding aids for them, so not only just knowing that we have them, but describing them. And then right now, the most important thing that we're about is accessibility. How do we get that online? How do we take what's in a spreadsheet with a number and get it onto our website in such a way that people can search it? We recently invested in some software, which was, I think, very reasonable in collaboration with Rachel and Eileen, called Catalogued, that helps us very easily take information that's on spreadsheets and get it into a searchable format with images so that you can search on something like apples and it will come up with everything that mentions apples in the finding aid and get a visual clips of what's there and then be able to dig into it. We've also put together themed exhibits. When the train came through Vergennes for the first time in 60 years, we did some research, took our objects and artifacts and our archival materials and put something together that not only we had an exhibit here, but we're able to put some panels together at the recently reopened train station in Vergennes, Ferrisburg. So we did come together with themes, and that each one of them, again, as Kristin was saying, it reaches a different part of the community who we might not have reached before. So train enthusiasts, would come and take a look at that and become part of programming and presentations. We also are about to work with the firefighters in the area, so 3 fire departments. They have historic collections at their firehouses. We have the historic fire of 1958, which brought them together. And there are still people who have those stories. So we hope to basically make our display cases available for them to be able to display their materials, tell their stories, have presentations, have a reception. And we've also invested in, with an arts grant, I think it was with our ARPA money, in recording devices too. We got some help from the Middlebury College archivist to tell us how she collects oral histories and the equipment that she used to do that. So we invested in that to be able to not only have the objects and artifacts and written materials, but also oral histories. So we hope to continue on with that. In terms of the money, we've been very successful in grant writing. We were able to sort of stand on top of the shoulders of the first CVNHP grant that we received, to then have 2 more important ones that are underway this year. One is to have the monies to be able to create history kits. So we're creating 5 history kits with 5 themes in collaboration with one of the history teachers at the middle school, so that we could bring those out, objects and artifacts, so the kids can actually touch the ones that are able to be touched, but they're really contextualized with also some of the materials that we have from the archives. So taking what we have and getting it out into the community, out into the hands of the next generation to understand and appreciate it. We've also helped with using our materials for walking tours that the Economic Development, the Regents Partnership, who supports the local businesses, loves to have. And we're a tourist destination since we are a big, beautiful library. So we really lean into our historical collection being something that brings in people and tourist dollars into the community. I think I would just leave with we have so many creative ideas and thoughts for what we want to do next. And the latest one that came up just yesterday was the possibility of creating a board game for the history of the 5 towns. So we're excited to think about what that might look like. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Joy.
I love that, the board game. You could do trivia night too. That would be awesome.
Lots of ideas and creativity from it, and what we can do. We have plenty of time, and prioritization is always the biggest challenge that I think we all have.
I really like the economic point you made about embracing the fact that the library is a tourist destination, and the fact that it can help the economy of the town too, because it's just always important to remind the select board of that aspect of libraries that I think sometimes doesn't get emphasized enough. So now let's move to Jeanne from Brooks Memorial.
Hello. It's so much fun to hear from my colleagues, and already, jotting down ideas. And so it was neat also in our preparation meeting that we had. Catherine and I ended up having some dialogue, because in a way I think Brooks Memorial is going at it from the other direction, that Catharine at Bixby, they're really embracing that role as library and museum, and artifacts, and how do we really do well by those by going right into it. And at Brooks, and I discovered this kind of by the seat of our pants, that here we found ourselves in the midst of the Brattleboro Words Project, which was a wonderful effort, a collaborative effort down here in Brattleboro that was grant funded, major federal dollars, and they did a bunch of podcasts are the main product of that. But it involved the Historical Society, some of the local indigenous groups, the library, Marlborough College at the time. So a whole bunch of things. And the library was just kind of like part of that mix. And as part of that, people came looking for stuff in our collection. And our collection was, and I'm guessing we're not alone in this, a really big mixture of things that over the years had been taken and placed in one of several rooms, and where the old stuff was. And oh, this looks interesting, let's put it over there. And so it was a real mixture, our local history collection of archival materials. And through the process of what we've done, the little bit we've done so far with this, I've learned about archival materials really being unique. And special collections materials that I'm starting to come to understand that are not easily replaceable, are special in some way. And then other, Eileen, I think used the word like common materials, books that are, published books that could be replaced that are not rare. And so it was a mixture of all those things. Plus, we had a separate room that had once upon a time, been a genealogy destination collection where there had been a really ambitious genealogist on the staff many years ago who wanted to develop that collection. And so people would come because we had a big paper genealogy collection. We got out of that business during my time here at Brooks, about 12 years ago. The usage patterns and the goals that were developed through our long range planning process, it was clear that trying to be a destination big genealogy collection just didn't make sense. So we, in a very systematic way, dismantled that collection, gave the genealogical materials to repositories that were, could really do well by them. So the Cheshire County Historical Society in Keene, New Hampshire, the Westfield State University in Massachusetts, and a few other places. We still retained a few, we still have some family histories of local families. So that was kind of like a first layer, and but we still had this kind of salad of like some genealogy materials and various kinds of local history materials. Then we had yet another room, still do, that has a lot of art and artifacts. And so a lot of the art is a large collection from the Loud family that gave materials to the library back in the 19th century, mostly European art. And then we also have some art from noted local artists like William Morris Hunt and Larkin Mead that have local significance. And then some, bits and pieces that have been given through the years, and also historical artifacts like the fire buckets that people in Brattleboro would have in front of their houses. And if a fire, happened, it was everybody's responsibility to grab their bucket and go help put out the fire. So a whole lot of different things. So folks looking for materials that really kind of put an emphasis on our what do we have here? I was really feeling, as the reference librarian here, I was really feeling, the information need of how do I know fully what we have, and how do I help people find what they need? And that happened. And then another layer is what other folks have mentioned, which is the need to repurpose some of the space. So cut to the chase. Right now, we had 3 rooms. We still have 3 rooms. The room that houses what the most of the local history materials is called the quiet reading room. People can come and go. The materials are no longer behind glass where people couldn't get their hands on them, because the majority of the material that remains in there is common published books. And then we have the room that had housed genealogy has a few genealogy books in it, but it is primarily a small study room that folks can reserve, because there's a huge need for that, for people to use video conferencing, to have small meetings and so on. And then the art collection, the trustees are looking at, we're bringing in folks to assess that collection and determine whether how much of that we save is how much is our responsibility and how much should be repurposed elsewhere. So for example, we have in that room a broadside where Vermont is mentioned as a state for the first time. Should we have that in a locked room at Brooks Memorial Library? Probably it could be better purposed, maybe someplace else. And so on the art level, we're making decisions, and then more kind of the realm where I hang out with the local history materials. So it's so hard to, I'm going to go over too, but I just wanted to say that, so the project that we did and that is really ongoing is that Rachel came down, helped us begin an inventory of what we had. And just in that meeting, it was great. We involved a couple people from the community. And I really got a sense, I felt more empowered to say, let's look at this stuff. Let's go right into this and see what we really have and what might be done with it. And so with Rachel's help, Rachel wrote up detailed notes that were super helpful for helping us, me communicate to our director and to the trustees, kind of what we might want to be able to do. Rachel helped us with how to approach a grant proposal. We wrote a tiny grant through the Vermont Community Foundation and had matching monies from trustee special funds and from our friends of the library. And we put all of that money toward paying a contractor with archives experience, John Levin, who manages archives for the Vermont Jazz Center, to come and assess our collection and carry out the steps that we, preliminary steps in that plan. And then COVID happened, so everything slowed way down, but as was possible, slowly, John did work through that collection. He identified archival materials and we sequestered them. At the moment, they are behind me. Almost all of that collection is here in my office where we can lock it, and it is safe from folks coming in and pawing through it. Ultimately, we want to put that in the art room I've mentioned. So that is very much in transition right now. Our next steps are to identify special collections materials in there. And at this point, I'll do a couple little show and tell things. So like John, for example, and I'm being very careful with this, this is a 19th century stagecoach register for Brattleboro. Obviously really cool. One of the things that's charming about it is when they ran out of space in the regular pages, they started scribbling notes on the end papers. And the first entries, people were taking sleighs down to Bernardston and Northampton from here. So, that was there. Some other interesting things that John identified as archival there was, this may not be completely unique, but certainly very rare, Portland Fancy Recollections of an Old Tradition. It's a documentation of old time community dancing in the state of Vermont, including a lot of folks from around Brattleboro. It has a bunch of pictures that go with it. Here's a guy playing a saw. I don't know if I think that might be reflecting, but you might get a sense of it. It also has a bunch of cassette tapes. So we're gonna have to figure out what happens with, digitizing of that material in the future. So that kind of stuff. One of the things that came out of that for me was even just understanding, getting a sense of what's special, what's archival. Then when the Noel Sing We Clear wonderful group recently disbanded at the death of Tony Barron, the folklorist and musician that was just so important to culture here, they had a big send-off and they compiled a gigantic binder that was made with special tributes from all the fans, and they brought it in and said, here, library, you can have it. I don't know if you can see this, but this is sad faces that someone had drawn and their feelings about that happening, and then there is a happy face in there. So this is just one page of, oh gosh, hundreds of pages. And so I knew immediately, okay, this is a real treasure. This is sort of something we want to keep. And right now it's just sitting in my office. And coming will be, a place to put them physically. And also, next steps in the grant are going to be to manage the cataloging records for these so that it's clear where they are, to create finding aids so that people can find the material, identify materials that need special treatment for management in the future so that they're safe. And also what's coming out of there, again, is this sense of like, what aren't we going to do? We're probably not going to keep everything. For example, that broadside I mentioned, maybe we need to talk to the Vermont Historical Society. Maybe we certainly need to talk to Brattleboro Historical Society. You know, so doors are opening for like how we kind of manage this stuff instead of it all being just like, I don't know. I'll say one more practical thing about this that happens a lot here is people come and say, look, I have a really old book. You should put it in your archives. And maybe that old book has something to do with the local history or not. Even if it does, does it have any particular value? Do I already have 4 copies of it? That kind of stuff. So in process, we're kind of like starting to see where the boundaries of things might be. And I'm very excited to know that there are folks who have already done some policy work so that we can craft some policy around this stuff. I'll show 2 more things that might just illustrate some of kind of the decisions we're making. So this is a first edition of Total Lost Farm by Ray Mungo, inscribed by the author, and it was published in 1970 about the communes in Guilford, and it is. There's not a lot of copies around. I'm thinking special collections, but this is the kind of thing John, when he had to step away from this project because he had other commitments, but he wrote us some great detailed notes about things we might want to take a look at that are special collections, even if they're not archival. So that's a next step for us as well. So that's like the kind of thing we're thinking about right now. And then this, just because it's hilarious. So Bill Fleming walked in one day with a brick and said, I think you need to keep this for your archives. And I tend to agree with him. It was a brick from the former Brooks Memorial Library, the building that was given by George Brooks that has sadly been torn down. That's another story from another era. Yeah, that's kind of my overview. I will say, it's amazing that we have the support of the professionals, the roving professionals, who can help us do right by our collections.
Great, thank you so much. So for the rest of the time we have, we'd love to hear from other people that are attending. If you have questions for our panelists, or if you have experiences that you've had at your libraries, this would be a nice time to hear about them. And then we'd like to spend some time just thinking about what you need most, like what are your most urgent questions, and what could we do? Like if we do create a community of practice, what would that look like? So if people want to turn on their cameras now, that would be, you can if you want, feel free to. And it's a pretty small group, so you can either use the raise hand feature, or if no one's speaking, just leap in. And of course, continue using the chat as well.
I'll just make one other comment, since I don't hear anybody, but in the meantime, one of the things that was a big aha for me at one point was we tended to think about, our 5 towns because that's who we serve and are supported by. And yet it quickly became clear in working with, the volunteers and the historians that we might have just one piece of a puzzle here. So it might not look like something in and of itself, but once the Sheldon Museum over in Middlebury gets a hold of it, or interestingly enough, the Westport across the lake, back when the lake froze over for 4 months of the year, there was huge commerce that was going on back and forth. So that's a big reason why the whole notion of accessibility became really important in what we were doing, so that more people who knew more than we did could get their eyes on it and start to make these connections. So just that was a big aha for me and continues to guide our thinking.
You know, that reminds me of working in, I worked in the Mad River Valley, and a lot of questions would come in from tourists, or people that, I mean, they were tourists, but they were people who had family in the area, so they didn't live here anymore, but, you know, they were in town skiing and they wanted to come and find out about, you know, something historic about their family that had lived there generations before. And that, you know, the accessibility for them, if things are digitized, they could be doing that from home as well as doing this actual site visit.
I think in many places like Vermont, we have the summer people, and similarly, Mad River has the winter people. We have the summer people, but because of the lake. So similarly, you know, their traditions go way back in terms of coming here and feel a sense of history and connection.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that. I think I had shared with you that we had someone reach out to us who's was doing research about Jeanne's parents and is now writing a book. And you know, that there's, yeah, just so many of the ways that things came to our libraries was from those threads that went out to different parts of the world. And I think now that we have the opportunity to make things digitally accessible, it also means that those puzzle pieces can maybe continue to live at the library. They don't have to go to the mother puzzle that, you know, is in Boston or whatever, but that we can still encourage people to connect with the resources that they need. Anyway.
And I would say I love
meeting.
I love that word accessibility, and it feels like on every level that's what we're about. You know, it's our non-special collection stuff as well. It's what we do as librarians, right? And I would say that certainly where I'm at Brooks is just fully understanding what we have, like just understanding for myself. Oh yeah, you know, that's the kind of question we can field directly. This is the kind of question where maybe you need to connect with whatever other agency and yeah, just to know the territory ourselves.
And once you can make it searchable, there you go,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's accessibility, and in a meaningful way, not just sort of the John Smith collection, but the fact, anyhow. So yeah,
you can get to the innards of the John Smith collection.
Exactly.
Why would I want the John Smith collection? Yeah,
exactly. And that's what the funding aids have really been so helpful. And the same thing, you know, the history team works in the room down the hallway here, and same thing. I hear this like, oh my God, and they come running in. And it's like, look, we just read this diary by a 6-year-old kid who talked about skating, and it's very fun.
Yeah, and I think, Jeanne, what you just described was like really in some ways very traditional library work, you know, connecting people to information and doing, you know, reference work. And so, yeah, it's all connected. So any questions or comments from people attending, if they're still here? Some are still here. I did put a link to an evaluation form for today's workshop. And I do have the attendance list as well. If you're all okay with it, we could, you know, if a community of practice does evolve, we'll be in touch. And anything that happens like that, we'll put out on the listserv and like our department digest and stuff too. So you'll be hearing from us if that happens.
What's the time frame, Joy, for the latest, I should say, on the centralized database or website or for the collections?
Rachel, do you have a thought on that? You're talking about the
smile
special.
On Eileen's face too. I know it's a big effort.
By that, Catherine, do you mean not a landing page for this group, but the statewide digital repository?
That's it, right?
Yeah. I spoke with some folks at VHS a couple weeks ago, including their development person, and they thought maybe 5 years. So we'll try to speed it up from that, but it takes a lot to stand up this kind of platform, and we don't have someone in place in the state who can really run with it right now.
Got
So
it.
we're going to have to do a little bit more groundwork, I think. And Eileen, I'd love to have you jump in to do a little more groundwork and then write a grant for an implementation grant. And we should, that our position should be strengthened by having had a planning grant, as long as we can demonstrate that we've gone through a deliberative process and have used that to really get our ducks in a row and we're ready to launch. But I think that implementation phase would probably be a couple years to stand that up. So we are looking, I'd say realistically, at least 3 years before that's up. But there's things we can do in the meantime.
Right.
So, you know, either putting up your own catalog it is in effect a digital repository, and you know there's opportunity to collaborate too around this as well.
Yeah, you know, I think I would echo Rachel, that, you know, a lot of what I think we want to sort of work on or focus on is the things that you can do as organizations, you know, before this platform kind of is fully formed, that are really going to help both for sort of just transmitting right to that platform that's available, but, you know, help access in the library, help access on your website, help access at the sort of the catalog at level. You know, I think is a great first step to take, and none of that work is going to be in vain to get to that prep work. So I think that's something we're continuing to figure out, sort of what are the things, you know, as far as workshops or training or materials and resources, we as sort of the three main organizations are putting together for that. So yeah, those will be around, I think, before we fully get the platform in place.
Thank you for pursuing it, though. That's exciting.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear about that progress, partly because, you know, we're still in identifying materials, making finding aids, that layer of things. And it's useful to know the bigger picture because like a really like volunteers are like their labor is so valuable, but sometimes somebody comes in and is like, I'm going to digitize your collection. You know, I've got a flash drive and I'm ready to go. And it's like, hang on, I think there are like protocols here. So, and being able to say, you know, there's bigger stuff going on. Let's think about how we can collaborate with efforts already underway.
I have another question about that project, but I don't want to. If there's other questions floating around, anyone in the audience? I'm wondering about the funding, and when is the plan for it to be at a cost to organizations to participate? I'm just wondering, you know, hearing about catalog it, we're not ready to do that yet, but I could see in a year we might be, and then is that going to be a stopgap expense until there's something that's statewide, or is it, if we say yes to just what are we saying yes to in terms of what would we need to plan for in terms of budget?
Great question, Kristin. And it's one of the things that in this planning phase, we need to identify, you know, and again, we are, as a state, we are far behind many other states. Digital Commonwealth is kind of the poster child, in my view, for what a statewide digital repository can be. So there's a lot of examples out there already. And one thing we need to do is identify the different funding models for these, because we also don't want to go through this huge effort with soft money to stand the thing up, commit our resources, get everyone else excited and involved, and then say, oh, we don't have any money. We're going to have to literally pull the plug on this resource. So looking at how we can create a funding stream for this, and looking at what other states have done, those that have been successful and those that have not can also be illustrative. And I would say that one of the things we definitely want when we're thinking about the functionality of the platform is to both allow for, not to get too far in the weeds, but allow for hosting as well as harvesting. And the difference there would be that the platform itself could host, i.e. store your digital assets, in which case you would not need a platform of your own. But it would also be able to harvest your metadata so that a search on the statewide platform would lead the user back to your catalog it and to the resource. So either option would be possible. And again, trying to make it palatable and something that people from all sorts of perspectives would be interested in. And some people don't want to host anything, would love to have someone else take care of all of it. Other folks very much want to retain that ownership and that control, but are willing to link out, be linked to. So hopefully both will be possible.
Yeah. And so, back to access, like making it really accessible to all organizations of all sizes and stripes, and to be able to make the material available to everybody.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and maybe there's some like size sliding scale based on collection size or something for if there is an extent. Anyway, really interesting and so exciting you're working on it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We are about out of time, and this has been so informative and really inspirational, and excited to see what comes out of it and future work. And thank you so much to Catharine, Jeanne, and Kristin for telling what it's really your experiences working directly with the collections. And of course, thank you to Rachel and Eileen as well, and to everybody who attended. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you at a future workshop soon.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you, Joy.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Joy.